Welcome to the Two Mats, brought to you by the subscribers of the New European.
Welcome, one and all.
We're going to talk. We should flag up.
Yes.
We're going to talk about Justin Welby and the aftermath of the Macon report that came out this week and Welby's resignation. I should flag up. It's there's some nasty stuff inherent in this conversation. So if you listen to this in the car with kids,
just
don't
be aware that this is coming.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Shall we start with this is, for anyone who isn't up to speed with the story so far, Justin Welby resigned this week as Archbishop of Canterbury after, as Matt said, the Keith Macon review into a character called John Smyth's abuse of more than 130 boys over decades. And the review was published last Thursday, but Welby only went this week. And it's continuing to run as a story. So maybe we can kind of give a flavour of that with, this is Julie Connolty, who's the Bishop of Birkenhead and Deputy Lead Bishop for Safeguarding, talking to Emma Barnett on the Today programme on Wednesday.
And what frustrates me is that we still have this institutional problem where we are not putting victims and survivors at the centre. And so in some ways we are not a safe institution. And that is so frustrating to those volunteers who work as parish safeguarding officers, for those people in parishes and chaplaincies who are doing all that they can to make their activities safe.
And I think that's really important to say and talk about those people. But just hearing you say the Church of England is not a safe institution, when its entire being is meant to be about goodness, forgiveness, protection, love. I mean, should more heads roll? Do you want to see more senior clergy resign today?
What I'm really clear on is that just the Archbishop of Canterbury resigning is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, quite.
Right, well, I agree with her.
Yeah, well, let's get into did you know, so for the sake of the listeners, many of whom I think will probably be in the same position I was as the story was growing and growing. I couldn't quite get a handle on the chronology of it and the time. And it's taken quite a bit of digging, actually, to understand and to pay attention. It goes back a
long time.
Because it goes back 40 years.
Yeah.
And this is where I think we've seen this phenomenon of a mixed reaction to Welby going, right? One of which is, this is an absolute disgrace and he should have gone a long time ago. And there's also been another reaction which says, well, he's a scapegoat. It happened a few months into his his tenure, and he's a media scalp. Right. Now, I was sympathetic to both views 72 hours ago, and I'm not sympathetic to both views now. Should we explore why that might be?
Well, the review describes Smyth, this horrific man whose practice was to thrash young men till they bled.
With table tennis bats.
We're talking about torture, really.
Yeah.
And the review describes Smyth as the Church of England's most prolific abuser, which is quite a title given its lengthy history.
And Matt, we should probably just add, because this is where it gets really insidious, that the reasons for the thrashings were to prove your love of Jesus, and to be fully
cleansed of sin,
the sins of masturbation, the sins of wrong thinking, all of this stuff. And the beatings weren't just like an old school, private school kind of corporal punishment. These were savage beatings running into thousands of
lashes.
To the point where these poor victims would be bleeding so much they needed to wear adult nappies, to soak up the blood. This is how bad it was. As
you say, Matt, it goes back decades. So Smyth was involved in these evangelical camps, Christian camps, where this was going on. And this is one of the critical first points is that Welby, even before I think he became a devout Christian, let alone took orders, knew Smyth and was aware of him in the early 80s when this first came to light. Now, how much Welby knew then, what did the Archbishop or the future Archbishop know and when did he know it, is still, I'm afraid, a bit opaque. But what is certain is that the idea that Welby only found out about Smyth very recently is as a person, and he admitted, been warned about him as a personality.
Yeah. And Welby lied, actually.
Yes.
We know that he lied about when his relationship ended with Smyth.
Yes.
Welby said, I haven't had contact with him for a long time, and we know for a fact that Welby was at another one of these evangelical
and
camps.
had given and carried on giving him money and exchanging Christmas cards.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, what happens in the early 80s is there's the first of many internal reports published by the Iwern Trust. I hope I'm correctly responding to that, and it revealed some of the horror that Smyth was responsible for. But it was covered up. David Fletcher, the head of that trust, said in 1982, "I thought it would do the work of God immense damage if this were public." So that's where it starts. Now, jump forward to 2013, and the scale of Smyth's wrongdoing becomes clear when a church officer in Cambridgeshire receives a letter out of the blue from a fellow survivor. And suddenly the police get involved, and Welby becomes aware. And what happens is that he's told that this is happening, and before long, 5 police forces are looking into Smyth, who, by the way, by then was safely ensconced in South Africa.
Yeah. Well, was it not in Zimbabwe?
In Zimbabwe. Excuse me. Sorry.
Because that, and forgive me if you're about to come.
No. Go ahead.
The reason the Zimbabwe thing is important is that he was shuffled off to Zimbabwe. And
correct.
Not only was he shuffled off, there was a collection of funds taken from people, including Justin Welby, to pay for him to go to Zimbabwe to export the problem, get it out
clearly
of our
to
face.
get him out of the way.
Yeah.
Now,
where he carried on.
This is where I think the rubber hits the road, which is that what the Macon Review discovers, and I'm quoting, is after 2013 in Welby, quote, a distinct lack of curiosity and a tendency towards minimization of the matter. Mm-hmm. So he becomes aware of the problem, and then is assured by some of his staff that it's being dealt with by the police, and basically leaves it be.
Yeah.
And what's pertinent to this about other resignations is that there are other bishops involved. I mean, the now Bishop of Lincoln, the Right Reverend Stephen Conway, was Bishop of Ely, and he was in charge of pursuing inquiries when the allegations started in 2013. And, quote, he didn't take every possible action to halt John Smyth in his pastoral or other work with young people. The Right Reverend Joe Bailey Wells, who served as a special bishop of the Anglican Communion now, was chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury in 2013. And the Macon report found that she was also involved in dealing with allegations against Smyth, but she was going to, quote, leave it to the diocese to pursue, and said she was very busy at the time. So going back to Welby, what's really interesting is that it wasn't conscience that forced him to resign. It was pressure.
Yeah.
There was a gap of several days between this coming out, to my mind, a straightforward case of, I lead this global Anglican communion. This happened. A lot of this happened on my watch. Yes, the crimes had been going on a lot longer, but this kind of slow wheeling on what to do about it happened on my watch. I got to go. And he said, no, I'm not going to go. Yeah. And then under huge pressure, he did go. Yeah.
So to that degree, the people who say this is a media scalp, they're correct. The media did keep the pressure on,
and rightly so,
in an absolutely positive fashion.
Yes, I mean, one person's media scalp is another person's media accountability.
Totally right.
I think Channel 4 did a great job.
Yeah.
I think several newspapers did a great job. I'm glad they
Private Eye have been, and I should flag up.
Yes.
That one of the main things that turned me was listening to Francis Wheen,
great Francis Wheen
on the Private Eye page 84, 94 podcast, whatever they call it. The page, their podcast.
Yeah, their podcast, yeah.
And there's 10 minutes at the end of the current episode, which is frankly, gobsmacking.
Yeah.
In that's where I started to think, this does not wash this kind of pious. I have to take accountability for the failings of the church. No, mate, you knew. You
and tried to wriggle out of resignation,
and you looked the other way
because he's not that far off mandatory retirement at 70.
Yeah.
And I think he obviously thought, if I can kind of stick in here a bit longer, this is obviously going to is going to spawn many more inquiries and possibly criminal investigation. I mean, Smyth, died in 2018 and therefore was never held to account. He was shades of Jimmy Savile. And on that note, just briefly, to add hypocrisy to the charge sheet against Welby, in 2017, Welby said the following on the Today programme: "I haven't seen the same integrity over the BBC's failures over Savile as I've seen in the Roman Catholic Church, in the Church of England, in other public institutions over abuse."
You're kidding.
So that was 4 years after he had been officially notified about Smyth, and he's basically having a go at the BBC.
He's saying the BBC haven't behaved as well as the Church of England or the Roman Catholic Church.
He is saying exactly that.
And that is, by the way, that's a bar that's so low, it's underground.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, that's a whole other.
I mean, honestly, what is it? Well, let's get into it. What is it about churches? Do you think that? And it's not just Christian churches of all kinds.
No, all churches.
There was a recent report in 2021 which identified child abuse as being endemic in all religious institutions in the UK.
I mean, once you introduce the power of the supernatural, the huge power over impressionable minds, and the authority of clergy of whatever kind, you have created a space where predators can have a field day unless there's adequate safeguarding. And actually, one of the funny things is that it's not funny, haha, but it is that safeguarding of a real sort in all denominations has only really very recently started to be put in place. Because, I mean, you mentioned the Roman Catholic Church's problems. I mean, the practice, the procedure was to move parish priests who got caught to another parish.
So here's I was born into the Roman Catholic Church.
So was I.
Right. So here's in 1962, Pope John the 23rd sent out a memo to all bishops worldwide, right, and saying, and I quote, and this is about how to handle sex abuse, child abuse in the Roman Catholic Church, right, and it said, but bishops, and these are direct quotes, bishops are instructed to pursue these cases in the most secretive way, restrained by a perpetual silence, and everyone is to observe the strictest secret, which is commonly regarded as a secret of the Holy Office, under the penalty of excommunication. Which means
going to hell.
Which means to be cast out of the Roman Catholic Church
and spend eternity in hell.
But think about that for a minute.
That's
They're
amazing.
saying if you're not complicit in this cover-up, you can't be part of our organisation.
It's mafia.
It's defining the organisation.
Mafia omerta plus God.
So listen, this goes out John the 23rd, right? And you can say, well, that's ancient history. It's another time. It's 60 years ago. Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, 2 years before he became Pope Benedict, while he was John Paul II, or to give him his full name these days, Saint John Paul II.
Yes.
While he was his Rottweiler, sent out a note confirming that this was still in place. Someone had written and saying, by the way, are we still not talking about this stuff? Sent out a note saying this is still in place. Everybody's mouths are shut on this. 6 months ago in Poland, a Dutch journalist wrote a report having gone through documents in Krakow, that John Paul II, when he was Cardinal of Krakow, had known about and concealed the paedophilia of a priest and had moved the paedophile priest into another constituency, into another parish, to get him out of the way, right? And that was part of a well-established pattern of just move the problem around, right? Get them out. If people start to understand, and we've seen it in that great film Spotlight.
Spotlight about the...
We talk about media scalps. There's
Boston
some
Globe.
media scalps for you. You know, the absolute exposure of the venal corruption and the cardinal sinning of these people who are meant to be our spiritual leaders.
The movie, which I think won best picture.
I think it got an Oscar.
Yeah. Brings out very well is how much resistance the newspaper encountered from the local church, which essentially said to the editor Marty Barron, "Look, you're going to do huge damage to the church and to Boston and the city and the image of the Church Universal if you pursue this." And I think that this is the heart of the matter, which is essentially churches are having to deal with, at last, with the modern idea that really it's not okay for people to behave like this with impunity, and that imperative is of a higher order than protecting the image of the church.
Yeah.
But what I don't buy about Welby was that until very recently he thought that, if indeed he thinks it now, because I think he thinks. I mean, I was watching Cathy Newman's first interview with him last week after the report when he refused to resign. And I'm afraid it was a man bathed in self-pity. I mean, he made all the right noises about the victims and so on, but it was quite clear, the crack in the voice, the appeals to prayer, all this sort of stuff, that he felt hard done by. And that animates, I think, because, Justin Welby is an old Etonian. He's a good guy. It's, good chaps. This idea that poor old Justin is being persecuted by the nasty press and about something that he can't do anything about now, and Smyth is dead, and what's all, and it's a pattern you see again and again and again and again. And I'm afraid I have zero sympathy for him.
Let me put this so that people don't pillory me. You could understand the motivation of a chief executive when faced with an existential crisis like this.
Yeah.
To think, oh my God, can I make this go away, right? You could understand at least what would go through someone's head, right? But when you're a religious, spiritual organization, you can't, I'm afraid. Well, it's a double betrayal.
What you trade in is morality.
Right.
That's your offer.
Right.
Or is it? I mean, this is where I find we get to the hypocrisy, which is the sell is morality. The sell is public morality. The sell is that the Church of England is, since the Reformation, the national church, and it is the custodian of the nation's morals. And archbishops variously felt able to intervene in national debates, and Welby was strongly against Rwanda. I agree with him on that and all the rest of it. And, 22 senior members of the Church of England sit in the House of Lords as of right, as Lords Spiritual. They're legislators, right? So they're the morality gang.
Yeah.
But are they? I mean, actually, what you see here is that they don't want to lose their very heavily diminished level of social control, because actually, this is I think, a crisis that will long outlast Welby and will do an already, seriously declining communion, the Anglican communion, terrible damage.
Yeah. And I think there's something in this sense that we were saying before we started recording, that because you have access to this alternative form of forgiveness.
Yes.
Because you can turn to God and take God's counsel, and you can say, I can forgive. I have the power of forgiveness.
Yeah.
I'm a pope, a bishop, an archbishop. I can forgive. It can be in my hands.
Yeah. Although all religions prescribe atonement as well as contrition, in some form. The language differs, but what's the atonement in this case? And it seems to me that Welby wanted initially his atonement to be that he did a sad interview on Channel 4 News, and then everyone left him alone. Yeah. Because he was a bloody good chap.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that won't do.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I hope. Well, we're clear on it anyway. I hope we've made things a little bit clearer for listeners about why perhaps you shouldn't just give the old Etonian. That's something we didn't touch on as well. This sort of.
Well, I did mention it. Yeah. I mean, it's this impulse to give the good chap the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And how often do we have to see this pattern before we kind of wake up? And it's quite clear that the safeguarding structures the Archbishop of York has said, who, by the way, would be a leading candidate to replace Welby, has said, well, that's enough. I think we've done enough now.
Yeah, our headers are old. Move
this
on,
is just the start.
Yeah.
It really is. And rightly so.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, we're going to come back in a moment after a short break. And by the way, if you want to come and listen to us talk in this style, we are at the Phoenix in Cavendish Square on November the 25th, which is a week on Monday.
It is.
And there's still a few tickets left, unbelievably.
I mean,
in the 20,000 capacity, it's not that big.
Well, it's in the same vicinity, really.
Yeah. It's there's still a few tickets left, so the link is in the show notes. Do come. We'd love to see you. Love to have a drink with you and enjoy your company as much as you'll enjoy ours, I'm sure. Come back in a minute. We're going to talk about a peculiarity of the Trump presidency. So one of the odd things that has occurred to me about Donald Trump's second presidency, I mean, obviously we all know it. He's only the second ever president to have an interval between
Grover Cleveland.
So Grover Cleveland the first, great tariff buster, by the way, ironically. But he's the psychology of a president who has had a term, is exited from a term.
Yeah.
Sits there resenting it for 4 years and then comes in is wholly different, isn't it, to the second term of any other president?
Funnily enough, Theodore Roosevelt tried it and failed. He served two terms. He stepped down and he tried to come back in 1912.
Was that with the Bull Moose Party?
It was called the New Progressives or something like that. Yeah. But anyway, he didn't. But the point you make, and you WhatsApped me with it, and I thought, this is really interesting because it's very hard to campaign from office. Clinton, having won in 1992, really struggled in 94 to 96. I mean, he won in the end quite easily his second term. But when you're presidenting, it's quite hard. And Obama completely blew the first debate against Mitt Romney in 2012 because he was busy presidenting, and fitting a proper campaign schedule around the really daunting duties and daily responsibilities of President of the United States is very hard. And even after Biden had stepped down, in July, I mean, a vice president doesn't have nothing to do.
No,
so
sure.
Kamala Harris had quite a bit on, and had to build her 107-day campaign around the responsibilities of vice president. But Trump was a private citizen. He could do what he wanted, when he wanted. And actually, if people are interested in I mean, it's a long story, but what went on between 2021, January the 6th, and him becoming the nominee and on the cusp of victory. There's a great book called Trump in Exile by an American journalist called Meredith McGraw, which is really good. And it is a non-linear story. It's it looked at the start of what was Biden's term as if Trump was finished. January the 6th, his Trump's favoured candidates in the 22 midterms didn't prosper. The Republican Party was lining up behind Ron DeSantis. And suddenly, the indictment started of Trump. And paradoxically, that led to a great resurgence of Trump's popularity. And here we are. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, he was able, I think it was a very interesting sort of trigger because what you said, because, of course, what being not in office enabled Trump to do was to think, in as much as he thinks deeply, I don't think to sort of reflect and plot and plan and seethe about what he would do, how he'd do it next time.
Yeah.
And he did.
Because you come in with this with absolute new energy, which
Yes.
if you win a second term, then really it's more of the same. And I was sort of thinking of the counterfactual that Trump had won
in 2020.
In 2020, how much better net that would have been for the world than what we've got now.
Oh, this is a disaster.
Because had he won, he would have had a second term bogged down in all the legislation that was flying at him.
Yes.
He would have. So can you imagine being a sitting president and all this stuff flying at you?
Dealing with the aftermath of COVID.
Being accountable for all of the stuff you had
economy
set up
in all sorts of
all of this
mess.
stuff. No one to blame.
No.
Just mired in his own incompetence.
Having to get out of Afghanistan.
All of the things that he dumped on Biden. So having to deal with that, he would have then limped through and probably would have exited the White House and been arrested on the lawn before he got into Marine One. And you're straight off to court.
And that would have been probably the end of Maga.
Yeah, exactly. So, but instead, we've had this hiatus.
So he gets in. He realizes that. He'd realized quite a while before, I think, that the way that he'd managed his old court at the White House, they used to call it the island of misfit toys. I love that. It was a sort of combination of establishment figures and true believers, and never again. There are two things I'm going to do. One is I'm going to have a good campaign team. So he brings in Susie Wiles, who's become his chief of staff now, and Chris Lasavita, who's a really hardened campaign veteran, and they, as we've seen, steer him not easily, because he's not an easy candidate to steer to historic victory. But he also preposterously is able to present himself as a change candidate. And he has this new narrative, which is around revenge and, a nation under siege and invasion and pet-eating migrants and a country in flames. And unfortunately, the American public bought it.
Yeah, and add into that another factor, which is the sense of urgency of a guy coming into a second term as though he was a first-term president.
Precisely.
And he knows he's only got 4 years to do it.
People say, oh, he's just a lame duck president. And there's a lot of...
Who said that?
A lot of people are. There's a lot of self-deception going on now to say, oh, it'll be fine. There's a lot of, oh, it'll be fine talk around, believe me. Yeah. One of it is, oh, he's a lame duck president. It won't... The fact that he's not planning another third term, although he did joke to the new congressional representation the other day that he might. And this, of course...
Was he joking?
You never know, Trump. I think he was. But anyway, let's assume he is joking. This gives him 4 years to just go for it, hell for leather.
Yeah.
Pedal to the metal.
And you were seeing this with Musk's appointment to this Department of Government Efficiency, which will, if people aren't nervous enough when he describes, when the closest analogy he can find for Musk's mission is the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
That should make you nervous.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't want any of it to work, right? But I'm a bit skeptical of this assumption amongst many progressives that we can all just sit back with our popcorn and enjoy it spinning out of control. It being Trump, lots of things won't happen, lots of things won't work. But this is not Trump 1. Yeah. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier today, but just going through the appointments so far, and a lot of them are very, very controversial because they're all MAGA loyalists. Yeah. I'm really interested in how many very young people he's appointing. Yeah. There's a cohort of MAGA millennials. So J.D. Vance, Vice President, is only 40. Vivek Ramaswamy, who's half of that...
Of Doge.
Of the Manhattan Project of federal slashing. Yeah. He's only 39. Matt Gaetz, the completely inappropriate nominee for Attorney General, is 42. Pete Hegseth, the nominee for Defense, who is a Fox News commentator who wants to de-wokeify everything, is 44. Stephen Miller, the maniac who's going to be in charge of the mass deportations, is 39. Elise Stefanik, who's gone to the UN, or will go to the UN is 40. Tulsi Gabbard, who was, of course, a Democratic presidential contender, has now come over to Trump. She's going to be the Director of National Intelligence. She's 43. And Lee Zeldin, who's going to be in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, is only 44. Now, for a Republican administration...
That's amazing.
That is almost like a kindergarten.
It's
right?
amazing.
And it shows you that Trump is thinking of his legacy. Yes, there'll be feuds and fights, and a lot of it won't work, and some of them won't necessarily be approved by the Senate, because he has the first setback of his since the election is that he hasn't got the Senate Majority Leader he wanted. He wanted Rick Scott from Florida, who's a MAGA man, and they elected John Thune from South Dakota, who's much more. One has to be a bit careful. He's not Shirley Williams.
Who's they?
The Senate. The senators. Yeah, the senators. That's who they've elected. So some of these people may not get confirmed, right? But as a strategy, it's clear he has a strategy. He does want to end the Ukraine war. He does want to deport millions of immigrants. He does want to slash the federal budget, and I'm sure in all of those things he won't get exactly what he wants. But it's a mistake to think that this is just going to be the Keystone Cops of the first presidency. There'll be muck-ups and disasters and all that. But I just detect a little bit on the left a kind of lazy assumption that he's such a chaos agent that it's bound to fail. I hope he fails. Yeah. But the only reason he'll fail is because the pressure is kept up on him. Yeah. You can't assume that all this will be a disaster.
No. I don't know why, but that internet meme phrase "fuck around and find out" is ringing loud in my head, and I think we have fucked around and we're about to find out.
Yes, look. It's good that the Democrats intend to look hard at what they got wrong, as long as they do look hard. Yeah. But right now, to be honest, they should be concentrating on how they're going to oppose this extremely. It's not coherent in the way that we mean, but it's savagely loyal.
It's focused. Yeah.
It's savagely MAGA.
Yeah.
It is all about Trump. Yeah. Already Wall Street Journal reported that they're drawing up lists of which generals to purge. Oh, God, now you start again, and Matt Gaetz is an interesting character because he's totally inappropriate to be Attorney General.
He has passed a law degree, I think, hasn't he? And he saw a few series of Columbo.
But he's also he was funnily enough, he was also the subject of a Department of Justice inquiry, which was launched by Trump's last Attorney General, Bill Barr, right? Which involved sex trafficking and just horrors. Yeah. And they didn't proceed to trial, but the Congress, the Congressional Ethics Committee, decided to carry on pursuing him, and it was going to publish its report today, Friday, and Gaetz avoided the publication by resigning as a congressman after Trump's nomination immediately. Right. I'm sure that report will see the light of the day. And I'm sure that Gates's appointments, the question of confirmation, will be quite a theatrical event.
Just in 60 seconds before we go, explain to me as best you can this thing about the Senate needing to pass legislation needing 60 votes, not 50.
Well, this is the filibuster.
Yes.
And it's one of the most controversial elements of the American Constitution. And what it is that in many, if not most circumstances of any controversy, there is a procedure which enables senators to pass a motion, meaning to get this through, you need 60 rather than 50.
Yeah.
And of course, the consequence of that is that a huge amounts of legislation doesn't get through.
Yeah.
And had Kamala Harris won and she wanted to pass and let's say she'd got a majority of Democratic senators, but not 60, her ambition to pass federal legislation to restore the abortion rights in Roe v. Wade would have been very, very difficult. And a question her administration would have had to ask is, how do we get rid of the filibuster?
Yeah.
It is that, there's a powerful argument that it is actually institutionalized gridlock.
Yes.
Irrespective of who's in power.
Yeah. But the point, the assumption then that because he's got the House, he's got the Senate, he's got the White House, he can do what he wants. That's not right.
It's
is
never
it?
it's never right. Yeah. But the problem is that he's assembling around him a team of people who were already dedicated to getting rid of exactly the kind of things you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, this is not the work of one presidential term. But, I am sure he will try somehow to get rid of the Senate filibuster because he will want to pass legislation.
Yeah.
He will massively increase the range of executive orders.
Yeah.
And then some of them will be challenged in the Supreme Court.
Which he's loaded.
But we've seen recently
fanboys,
the Supreme Court having essentially given him the powers of an absolute monarch. Is not likely to.
Yeah.
So it's going to be wild and whirly. I mean, he's not a despot yet.
Yeah.
But the point is, all I'm really saying is that the direction, for the reason that you said at the start, Matt, which is that he's had time to, I think, emotionally, as much as anything, because Trump's not a thinker. What do I actually want to do?
Yeah.
And the answer is, I want to change everything before I go.
Yeah.
And he's putting in place the bits.
Yeah.
So that he'll have a fighting chance. So all I would caution people is assuming that because he's nasty, which he is, and because a lot of the people around him are mad, which they are, that it won't happen is a non sequitur.
Thank you. Very good. Excellent. Hope that's clear to everybody, as it's clear to me. Come and join us for an evening with the two Matts at the Phoenix in Cavendish Square, London, a week on Monday. Ticket link in the show notes. Subscribe to the New European.
Absolutely.
I mean, honestly, what's going on if you're not?
I don't know why people aren't, if they haven't yet.
Frankly, you should examine your conscience every bit as much as Justin Welby if you haven't subscribed to the New European.
At least.
There's a link in the show notes for that, but it's theneweuropean.co.uk/2 Matts, number 2 MATTS. Send in any questions, any feedback to our email address at 2matts@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2 MATTS@tnepublishing.com. Thank you to our superb production office producers, Rethink Audio, led by Matt Hill. Managed to get that out. And until our Q&A on Sunday,
It's goodbye from me.
it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.